Welcome to tonight's concert and pre-concert talk. We are being joined tonight by Jameson Foster, who's an ethnomusicology PhD at CU Boulder, and his research focuses on the way music is related to Scandinavian identity. Jameson teaches a class at CU called Music Appreciation, Vikings, and Norse Mythology, and is the founder of Nordic Sound, a public archive for Nordic music. He'll be speaking tonight with Danish String Quartet violinist Rune Sørensen and cellist Fredrik Schøyen. Is that right? Close enough. Thank you, Fredrik. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Jameson, Rune, and Fredrik.
Do we do microphones? Yeah? All right. I'll sit here so we're not so far away. Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jameson Foster. I am an ethnomusicologist at CU Boulder, and Nordic music of all kinds is sort of my specialty, but more specifically, folk music and the various ways it's used in anything from death metal to string quartets. So I'm pretty stoked to be here and talk with these two lovely gentlemen about the Danish String Quartet's newest album, Kiel Road. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves before we get started?
Sure. My name is Fredrik Schøyen. I play the cello in the Danish String Quartet.
Yeah, and my name is Rune Tonsgaard Sørensen. I'm from Roskilde, Denmark, and I play the violin or fiddle.
All right, so guys, welcome back to Denver in the Colorado area. I feel a little spoiled. I've gotten to see you guys live now twice just in 1 year here. But so you guys recently had your newest album come out, Kiel Road, and you guys have been doing this folk music as a classical string quartet thing for quite a while now. What were some of the fresh inspirations so anything from inspirations to what you wanted to do differently with Kiel Road as opposed to your previous folk music records that you've done?
Well, probably a combination of things, but I myself, I grew up listening a lot to Irish music, and I always tried to play Irish music on the cello. It sounded horrible, and I was never very satisfied with what I did. But I always had this, longing for doing something with that. And that paired with also the fact that in England you have such a great collection of folk melodies, song melodies, songs. And also the fact that when we play Nordic or Scandinavian music, very often we get comments that it sounds a little bit Irish or, Scottish or whatever. And there is clearly a connection between those two regions. So the short answer is that we just couldn't help ourselves. We needed to explore a little bit of this music, but looking a little bit deeper into it, and that's also why the CD is called Kiel Road. You will find, back in the day, you will find a lot of connection between Britain and Scandinavia. And I mean, look at Norway, for instance. It's a long country. If you travel by horse or whatever you did, it would take weeks to go from north to south. If you went from the west coast over to Scotland, it would take 2 days, much faster. So even that connection is closer than parts within Norway. So clearly, also musically, there is connections here.
Yeah. We released the first folk music album back in 2014. It was called Woodworks. And so Kiel Road is the third album of its kind. And Whereas Woodworks was just basically us loving a bunch of tunes, putting them on an album because people sort of encouraged us to do it with no further bigger thoughts behind it. Then Last Leaf, our second album, and maybe in particular Kiel Road, is a little bit more well thought through. I would say a more maybe coherent journey from start to finish. But of course, you learn a lot of things along the way, and we try to challenge ourselves with some new instruments here and there, and whistling a little bit, using our voices and stuff like that. So, we're trying to search for new ways of expressing this type of music in a string quartet setting, and the latest result is called Kiel Road.
Awesome, yeah, and I love what you say about pointing out how much easier it is to get to a different country than it is to just travel from one end of Norway to another. I know at least when I'm teaching Vikings at CU, the first thing that I tell my students is that the sea was the highway of the time. It was much easier to travel by water than it was, especially in a place like Norway with a lot of swamps and mountains, and of course deep, dangerous forests filled with trolls. But especially, right, what you look at when you see how these folk music traditions travel is in an older setting, it seems like difference is what's focused on. What makes Norwegian music Norwegian, what makes Danish music Danish, what makes Irish music Irish. And something that I've enjoyed about this conversation that you guys are taking with Kiel Road is sort of instead looking for similarity, where how a lot of these folk music traditions were shared actually in coastal towns because of that highway. So it almost can, by default, gain some sort of maritime sound to it. Naval traveling from trading port to trading port. But something that Rune said, a comment there is, when you first started doing this folk music in a classical music setting, you say that you were encouraged to do it. You kind of peer pressured into doing it. What was the response at the time, if you want to go down that road, especially in the classical music world, to doing folk music in this setting? And if it has at all, has it changed now doing one in 2024 as opposed to 10 years ago?
Yeah, well, actually our first attempt on the genre was way back, actually in 2004, where we played a little Swedish chorale, like a song, a hymn, at a competition. I remember that. And for the past 20 years, this thing has just grown, and blossomed throughout the years. And when Fredrik joined our quartet in 2007-8, of course he brought a lot of new energy to the traditional music, and it's the two of us who arranges the music. So when we recorded, we were encouraged to record the album because we already loved the music and actually had a bunch of arrangements already. But we didn't have any plan with it. It was not like a deliberate career move or anything like that. It was basically just us recording some music that we really liked. But the interesting thing was actually the reaction. To see how people reacted to this music came as a big surprise to us, because we also bring the music to the stages. Tonight we're gonna play some music, and it's a nice window into our culture, into our heritage, into the Scandinavian sort of culture, which is nice to show sometimes, and in a mix with Beethoven or Haydn or whatever, So it has been really good reactions, and we're just happy we can perform the music.
Yeah, I think you you mentioned something that I think is very important in this conversation. That the idea of bringing folk music on stage is not a new one. And there was a Norwegian violinist back in the days, 200 years ago, Ole Bull, who brought a Norwegian fiddler on a US tour, actually, and kind of showcased him on the stage. This is what tradition looks like. That's not exactly what we are trying to do. We're trying to, and first of all, I need to also say that what we are playing are arrangements of folk music. It's our take on traditional music, so it's not the pure tradition. The pure tradition would be much simpler in a way than what we are presenting. But we have adapted our music to go to a stage. Otherwise, it would be only the same melody over and over and over again, because it's used for dance normally or something. So I think the difference between us then and this violinist 200 years ago is that we actually try to make this a part of a performance, a part of the whole experience, a part of the show. And that's why I think it's also has a place in a way alongside all the other things that we play. It's meant for the stage.
I love that you stole my next question, which was sort of, but I would actually love to open it up if you have any other comments. The idea, particularly with Scandinavian music, I was just geeking out about Grieg with you guys before you came out here. The idea of taking Scandinavian folk music and sort of reshaping it or presenting it in a classical context is about as old as Norwegian classical music itself in a lot of ways. So I would still like to open it up a little bit. Is there anything, knowing about that history, is there anything in particular that you guys want to do differently aside from what Fredrik just talked about when you guys do think about your role maybe as sort of like a, if I can put a word into your mouth, cultural ambassador of sorts to bring your culture to other people? Do you look at ways that it has been done in the past, and is there a way that you guys want to do it differently and really in your own way?
That's a good question. To me personally, I am very interested in trying to find new ways of writing or arranging music, trying to seek out new directions and constantly improving the arrangements or compositions. But it's nothing that I think about when I'm sitting at the piano with my coffee arranging. It's just what comes to me. But of course, we only want to present arrangements and music that we really are satisfied with, and that we feel has a relevance, a story, a clear character, all these things. We've been playing all the mainstream classical repertoire for more than 2 decades now, and when doing that, you get a lot of experience from the big masters in terms of how to write for a string quartet, what sounds good, what kind of voicings, how to write a chord so it sounds nice, and all these things. And this toolbox just becomes bigger and bigger the more we play. And also we try to keep our ears and eyes open for all kinds of music in general. And it's all those inspirations goes down to this pot, lots of ingredients, and it's being distilled into some kind of result in the end. And it's such a nice and stimulating process for us because it stimulates some other parts of the brain somehow. When you're sitting with the scores there and trying to figure out what works and all these things.
Yeah, and I think we're definitely a product of our time, just like Grieg was a product of his time, and maybe, or I think in 50 years maybe our music isn't all that. Maybe it's completely forgotten. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I think we tap into a much older tradition of musicians playing their own works. People used to do that all the time. The guy here in front of me, Mozart, he did that. He was a product of that kind of musicianship. And the Baroque composers, all of them were also musicians. And then somewhere, Wagner, that period of time, after that, it became such a big division between musicians or composers, And so we're just sort of doing the same thing that musicians and composers have always done, actually, I think.
Awesome. So that segues pretty nicely into something else I wanted to ask you guys about, and that is, when I see people talk about your music, it's often looked at in a way of how, even when you guys are playing classical music, it sounds folky, right? It's a very common way that I see people describe your music. And I guess I wanted to give you guys the chance to speak for yourselves on that, is when you are sort of dancing between the world of folk music and classical music, and maybe it's even arguable if they are two different worlds, right? Is there anything in particular that you've learned from diving deeper into folk music that you carry over to performing classical music?
Yes, and I think it's very simple. Don't be afraid to break traditions.
Awesome.
There you go.
Nothing to add? No, you're good?
Well, yeah, I completely agree. Playing the folk music gives us a certain amount of freedom in a way, because it's our own material. And sometimes classical musicians tend maybe to be a little bit afraid of touching the big masters and the scores, and and also for good reason, because it is great music. But I think it's the freedom in sort of the approach can sometimes be helpful, I think. And then obviously there's all the similarities, as you say. Is it that different? Maybe not, because there's a minuet in every single Haydn string quartet, and Mozart. All Baroque music was dance music as well as folk music is dance music. So we try to approach both things the same way, with the same level of detail, the same care, the same, trying to work with colors and characters and all that. There's no big difference there. So, yeah.
Awesome. So I just got the 5-minute warning. A question that I would love to ask you guys. You've been, as I opened with, you guys have been doing this for a while. Nordic music, Nordic stuff is pretty hot right now. It's kind of gotten very popular over the last couple of decades. And I guess I want your guys' perspective, especially as people who have been doing this for a bit. And you can really trace Nordic popularity growing over the course of even your careers over the last 20 years. Do you guys have just any comments or reflections sort of on the growing popularity of Nordic music, and sort of where you guys see your place in that, again, as people who bring Nordic culture, Scandinavian culture around the world?
I think people always like authentic things, right? And I think that's really the secret to why, if that's true, that Nordic music has gained some popularity, because the tradition is living. It's very much alive. And it's still like you can go to some parts of Norway and they will still play the Hardanger fiddle, and the 16-year-olds will dance, Saturday evening. So it's still a thing. It didn't die, and so it's authentic, and that's the main ingredients. What we are doing is something a little bit different from that. I already explained, but I hope that what we can do is to be sort of ambassadors and just maybe open a tiny little window to to this, and then hopefully you will all go home and search Hardanger Fiddle on Spotify tonight and be curious about that kind of music and discover it. And there is really something to discover there.
Yeah, well, you know, also when we compare ourselves to Irish music, as we started the conversation with, Irish music is, you know, probably the biggest cultural export success ever, you know.
The chieftains knew what they were doing.
Yeah. And maybe there is a time now where the Nordic music is gaining some kind of popularity. And I think it's about time, because there are some really great tunes from Scandinavia, and we are just a little part of that puzzle. We're trying to do our best to play the music that we really love, and if that moves some audiences, we're more than thankful for that.
And we are too. And I do have to say, it is really cool seeing, at least, I know Oslo specifically has a really cool, like, I don't want to say youth music, but a lot of these youngins are doing some pretty crazy stuff with folk instruments, putting them into different genre contexts that blow my mind every time I listen to them. So pretty cool stuff that is indeed keeping it alive. So before I let you fellas go, anything else you guys want to say before we all await the great performance you guys have in store?
That would be, in that case, that I hope you regard music as music and not as genres. We have talked a lot about classical music or folk music, but really what we are trying to do is just to present music that we think is good. It doesn't really matter what you call it.
Again, ditto. You guys hang out too much. All right. Well, thank you guys for giving us some of your time before you play. And thank you all for listening. See you guys in the audience.